What's up? It's your girl Janessa, and this is Find Your Wild with a Y podcast. Welcome. I am back with the Dr. David Lipman, the owner and founder of Physical Evidence Chiropractic. You can find him or reach out to him at physicalevidenceconnect.com. Again, this will all be in the notes of the podcast. Last time we talked a little bit about biooptimization, why that's so important, how you can do that in a clinic and outside of a clinic. And then today, we are going to kind of go through your labs, right? And talk about why the labs are important, how to do them, all that fun stuff. So if a patient lives in another state, let's say, how can patients do their labs through you?
So great question. Fortunately, the lab that we work with will drop ship a test kit to anybody in the 50 states. And so they're able to go to a local blood draw lab. It could be like a LabCorp, or it could be one of the more popular ones. There are about 250 around the country called Any Lab Now. And they're pretty well dispersed throughout the country. So you can take the test kit to Any Lab Now. They'll do the blood draw, and then they'll send it off in the pre-packaging that's provided to the lab that's actually here in South Florida to get the results, do the review, and then we'll be able to put together a plan based on the results of that, both micronutrient testing and the methylation testing. And sometimes we add a couple of others after conversation. As an example, we went through yesterday with a young man, and it seemed based on his symptoms that we wanted to also test for homocysteine. And so there's other things we can throw, but the two main ones are the methylation detox and the micronutrients. But again, sometimes certain things will get fleshed out, and we might want to add a couple of other things in the mix just in case.
That makes sense. And that seems easy enough. I mean, we've got labs all over the country, right? So,
yes.
Okay. And then we talked about this kind of high level last time. Why are doing these labs so important? I just want to reiterate this for everybody.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, in sort of the medical model that we live in, we're not given information early on about our health status in terms of how our bodies just process nutrients to make the things that we need to make to function normally. All the things, whether they be hormones or enzymes or amino acids or neurotransmitters, basically everything that we make, our body needs to make to flourish and survive, not just survive, but flourish, has to do with the nutrients that we take in and how the body is processing them and converting them into the nutrients that our body needs to use. So in other words, when we eat food or if we take vitamins, the form that those nutrients are in, we can't use them. Our body has to convert them to be usable for the body. And that process is called methylation. Now, the fact is that many of us, maybe 40 or 45% of us, have certain mutations in those processes that we've inherited from one parent or perhaps both parents, which affects our ability at the cellular level to convert the nutrients that we're taking in from food or supplements into what the body needs in that cell to function, to make energy, to make the things it needs to make. So unfortunately, as kids, which in my opinion, we should learn this like right away because these things will affect us our entire life. So every pediatrician, I think, first day when they have a child, they should get this testing done because it's an easy enough thing to do. I mean, with a child, you can do it as a cheek swab. You don't even have to do it as a blood draw. And then this information will guide their nutrition for their entire life. And so that's why that's so important. The second part is that we're actually looking not in the bloodstream, but inside the cell to see what the content is nutritionally, because the fact is you could have ample amount of vitamins and minerals and everything we need in the bloodstream, but if it's not getting in the cell, it's of no value because it's inside the cell that this all happens. So by assessing both of those, you now have a blueprint of what your genetic makeup is in terms of how your body does or doesn't process things, as well as what are your specific deficiencies. And this will give you an opportunity to create a supplement plan that matches the forms you need to take them in and the deficiencies you actually have. So you're not just throwing supplements at everybody and saying, oh, this is good for you, this is good for you. It might not be. Yeah. Because if somebody can't convert certain things, you don't want to be taking something you can't convert because then you end up building up levels of things that shouldn't be built up. And then not to mention you're not getting the nutritional value of it too. So that's why these things are so important to know how to actually get what you need so your body can make what it needs to make and function normally. I mean, everybody should walk around feeling
Yeah.
good. And the fact is, most people just aren't.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but that's why we're here, right?
Yes.
That's why we're doing this. Okay, so we're going to do something exciting, right? And we are going to look at your labs. So you do the two different testings, right? One is the genetic testing, like you mentioned. That's done once. That's never going to change. It's just our
Mm-hmm.
genetic makeup. And then the other one is going to
That's
look
correct.
at what the nutrients that your cells are actually taking in, and that will change over time, right? Depending on the supplements that you're taking, we want to be able to measure that.
Correct.
Okay. So which one
Mm-hmm.
are we going to look at first? And if you guys are watching, you're going to be able to see on the screen, so we can kind of walk through what these labs look like and how to kind of understand them.
Yes. So I'm going to first pull up. Let's see. Let's share this. Actually, I'm going to go back to this. Can you see the screen okay?
It's coming up now. Yep.
So this is my methylation cycle. This is how my body at the cellular level is converting those raw materials from, again, food or supplements into the usable form that my body can use to make all the things as you see at the top. You know, how we make our DNA, our neurotransmitters, our enzymes, all the things we need to make. So the cycle kind of starts down below. And what we see here in mine is that instead of each one of these rectangles being green, which means that we've not inherited any mutations, but these things are functioning as they should. You see, one of mine is red, which means both of my parents gave me a mutation. So this gene here, this enzyme, is not working to convert folic acid and folate, as an example, into 5-methylfolate. So this is the beginning of the cycle. So you can see how if you're not working at step one, it could certainly cause issues going down the line. Now, the other two I have, my MTR, my AHCY is green, so we're good there. But on the yellow side with the COMT and MTRR, one parent gave me this mutation, which means these genes are only working about 40% of the time. So how do you make sense of all this, and what does it
Not to
mean
cut you off, can you
specifically?
zoom in a little bit
Yeah,
on the bottom part so we could see that a little bit more?
back on
Yeah, right
here,
there.
this area here. Okay. I don't know if I can zoom. I think I can. Let me see. There
There
we
we
go.
go.
Is
Yeah, yeah,
that
I can
better?
see it much better.
Okay. So the MTHFR, it's gained some popularity lately. Thankfully, to a lot of guys like Gary Brecker that are out there on the internet and podcasting, just explaining this to people. Because again, we haven't learned this through our medical community, so we rely on people like Gary and some of the other guys out there, and myself and you to share this stuff with people, because this is something people could all access and need to. But as it turns out here, since I'm not able to convert folic acid or folate into 5-methylfolate, it means a couple of things. First, I shouldn't be taking in folic acid or folate because my body's not converting it, and I don't want to build up those substances in my body unconverted. And the fact is that we have so many avenues that folate is getting into our diets, especially through any kind of wheat products or processed bread products, pasta, rice, and all the things that they've actually sprayed for the last 30 years because they were trying to avoid a neural defect when pregnant women have having children, and when the child first starts to develop, they don't want that neural defect. So they found that folate and folic acid is one of the things that will prevent that. However, they didn't take into account that a lot of people can't process that. So to have all of our wheat out there, in this country sprayed with that stuff is a bad thing, because if 40% or more of us can't process that, we don't want to take that stuff in.
Well,
The
and
other
like
thing
on a
is
side
go
note, the
ahead.
folic acid, when you're pregnant, they just hand it out. They want pregnant women taking it all the time. So that is a major
Right,
concern if you can't
major
methylate it.
concern. That's right, and it's also been linked to postpartum depression because of the way that you're not getting what you need and you're taking this thing, and so a lot of the things we call pathology, like even postpartum depression, is that our bodies are not processing nutrients properly and they're not making what we need to just feel
Hmm.
normal. And so for me, one of the things I learned from this, not only can I, and unfortunately, my diet doesn't really consist of, bread, pasta, rice, any of the grains or anything. So I was good there. However, I was drinking energy drinks for a while, and most of them, except for I think two, have the cheap form of vitamin B12, which is called cyanocobalamin. It's synthetic. It's actually derived from sewage plants, to believe that. And most of them, because it's inexpensive and it's synthetic, they'll put them in as vitamin B12. However, if you can't convert cyanocobalamin to methylcobalamin because the MTHFR gene is not working for you, guess what? You're building up cyanide in your body. How crazy is that? Well, that's the fact. Gary Breck has been very, famous on talking about that, but it's the fact, and so many people need to realize that because so many people drink energy drinks, and 40 or 50% of the population have this issue. So again, a lot of information that people need to have just about living in this modern world and the cultural things that we do and take for granted that might not be so good for us. So another thing that we'll see here is that because I can't make and I can't process folic acid and folate into 5-methylfolate, and I need 5-methylfolate to be able to go to the next level to, as you see, create B vitamins and to move on to converting homocysteine to methionine and all the other things that come down that line where I need that 5-methylfolate as the base. So the cool part is that since I can't convert what I'm taking in to make it, I just have to supplement with it. So even though it's step one and sort of the worst one to have, it's the easiest one to fix because 5-methylfolate is a supplement that we can take. So it's already methylated and it can go on to the next step and the next step because that's the form that in the custom supplement blend for me is what I was taking. So now just to kind of look up the line here too, I mentioned homocysteine and methionine. These are both amino acids, but the way our processing in the cells happen is that we need to keep these in balance. We need to convert homocysteine into methionine, and they must stay in balance. However, if, as you can see here, I'm not processing this completely because I have an error in this gene here, I build up levels of homocysteine that shouldn't be. And homocysteine, even though it's an amino acid, it's inflammatory when it builds up in quantity. And as it's going through the bloodstream, it can come in and affect the smooth muscle of the insides of our arterioles and our arteries, which can cause constriction, which leads to high blood pressure. So that's why they can say, well, you have high blood pressure. I don't know why you have it. They say, well, did your father have it? Yeah. Did your grandfather have it? Yeah. So it's genetic. But they didn't know how genetic it was. It's actually genetic here because we're not converting something that should be converted and kept in balance, but instead homocysteine becoming, increasing in concentration in the blood and being an inflammatory type substance is causing it. So what's the solution? The solution is to take supplements to help break down the homocysteine and to raise the levels of methionine so these things stay in balance. And methionine is one of the amino acids that creates what you see SAMe at the top, which helps to quiet the mind for sleep. So you can see how people could have sleep issues because they're not making these conversions and, again, making the things they need to from a neurotransmitter standpoint to sleep properly. And, so many people these days more than ever, I think, are suffering from that. So these are really important things to understand, and it's such an easy test to take. And it's easy to implement the solutions once you understand that. Do you have any questions? Because I was just going to go over that last gene too, but feel
No,
free.
I mean, I think this is just fascinating, and it seems like such a simple fix just to understand your genetic makeup and how you break things down or how you don't break things down. And then, the negative impact of not understanding this, where people go and they get, oh, you have high blood pressure. That's what they told my dad too. He was like the most athletic man ever. And then, of course, they want to give you medicine for that, which then creates a whole other cycle of other things, which we're not even
Oh,
addressing how
yes.
pharmaceuticals are broken down. But this is just fascinating and kind of eye-opening.
Yes. Some other things too about the MTHFR. It actually will cause our body's ability to detoxify the body, through the liver and such. It's going to affect that negatively too. So our bodies can't, when we have these mutations and we're not making the things we need to, that the MTHFR gene will help, through the enzymatic process we'll have problems detoxing. And living in the toxic world that we do, we need every bit of help to be able for the body to detox itself as best as possible. So that's another thing that we could start having downline effects of just not making these conversions. But I wanted to talk about COMT because it's very interesting. It's got this moniker which is called the worrier or the warrior,
Mm.
meaning that people that have either the what's called the heterozygous, where one parent gave them, as in my case, the mutation, or in homozygous, where both parents gave the mutation, and these conversions aren't working, people will tend to either focus heavily and worry about a particular thing, even if the thing isn't even as warranting that kind of worry. It'll be an exaggerated, or they'll tend to be very aggressive, and that's because again they're just not making the neurotransmitters that will allow them to be more even keeled and more objective thinking about a particular situation. So people that tend to hyper focus on something and super worry about it, that's many times linked to the fact that they're just not converting things to the next level where they're getting these neurotransmitters that should be serotonin and dopamine and things like that. So it creates this crazy cascade. And again, in the case of COMT, people tend, from a personality standpoint, to be either warriors or more aggressive as warriors, over things that just wouldn't warrant it normally.
Interesting. And so if I'm looking at this, the red would indicate that you have it coming from both parents, right? The green means you're
Yes,
fine, there's no genetic mutation or disruption. The yellow would mean it was just coming from one parent. Okay.
that's correct. So this is the methylation cycle. So again, this was my first eye-opening, window into my own genetics and how my body is or isn't processing. Now, the second thing I did at the very same time was what we call a micronutrient test or cellular nutrition assay, where we're actually looking inside the cell instead of into the bloodstream and actually seeing what deficiencies might exist inside that cell. So what's interesting here, if you could see here on the top for me, my vitamin D was showing as almost non-existent inside my cell. However, the very same week, I did a full blood test to go to a doctor's visit, and it showed my bloodstream had 98 out of 100. The 100 was the top end of the range. I was at 98, meaning that in my bloodstream, I had tons of vitamin D.
Hmm.
Problem is that the supplement I had been taking for that past year didn't have K2 in it, and K2 is a delivery system for vitamin D into the cell. So again, it was interesting to see that my bloodstream was full of it, but wasn't getting into my cell. And of course, identifying why is using the right supplementation to get it there. And this kind of blew me away, Janessa, because I had 14 deficiencies, and I've been taking supplements since the 1970s. And so it was really eye opening for me to see how much deficiency I had, despite my best efforts with
Mm-hmm.
food and with supplementation. Now, I did find out from the lab because I had COVID in 2020 very badly, and this test is about 6 months after that. So COVID does attack the cell membrane, and in my case, it probably caused a deficiency or an inability for my cells to properly take in these nutrients through the cell membrane. So, I mean, 14 is huge. In fact, I haven't had a patient in the last 3 years that we've been doing this testing have as many as me in one shot like
Wow.
this. However, the cool part is that, again, once we identify the methylation issues and then we actually look at these cellular deficiencies, we can now create a supplement plan that addresses all of those needs, which is what we did here. And we created this. So this was my first custom supplement. So every one of the capsules in my supplement plan had every one of these nutrients together. Now, my dosage was 14 capsules a day. Again, I was coming from a pretty big
Mm-hmm.
deficit. So I was taking 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening. Now, what was really cool is that I did this for about 13 months and then I retested. Now, look at this. On my retest, all of those deficiencies, remember all the red that was on that other
Mm-hmm.
chart? Gone. I have a few borderlines left, but all that red was gone. Look at vitamin D, all the way back to the normal range because I took a supplement now that had K2 in it. So I was actually able to retest a year later and see how the results of these capsules that I was taking from a custom blend standpoint actually did intracellularly to me. And in that time, I had blood pressure that was going up. And again, I'd been normal my whole life, and there wasn't anything I changed in my eating. I did get rid of the energy drinks once I learned about that. But I believe because the homocysteine was getting out of control because I wasn't making the conversions. So my blood pressure had gone up. and now it's way back down to a normal range as it should be. But at least I was able to take an actionable step by simply taking the right supplements to balance out homocysteine and methionine, so that inflammatory response on the inside of my arteries was no longer a consideration. It wasn't causing that constriction and raising my blood pressure. So how many people are walking around with high blood pressure, end up going on statins, and all they need to do is to take a supplement to rectify that? I mean, that's really what the beauty of this, and understanding this about oneself, can really do for their, everyday, health and well-being.
That's just fascinating. Okay, so what was the specific supplement, just out of curiosity, that helped? I don't know if there was one with the homocysteine.
Yeah, so one of them was actually having to bring up my methionine. So we have L-methionine
Okay,
here,
which makes sense.
and yeah, there's another amino acid. It's just escaping from my mind. I'm just having a brain lesion here for a second. It's in another amino acid. It helps to break down homocysteine. I want to say it's citrulline, but don't quote me. I want to be sure, or it might be glycinate. L-glycinate, I think, is what it is. So again, those are things that see, we have the glycinate over here.
Yep.
Yeah, so we want to again identify the specific supplements, and it's really cool. The lab that we work with takes the actual
Mm-hmm.
reports, and they will through an algorithm take your methylation, then take your micronutrient, create the supplement list, but then we also do a consultation to actually ask about symptoms, what supplements they might be taking already, any medications. So once that consult has been completed, then the custom supplement plan will be in place, because many times through the consultation we might add certain things or we might subtract certain things, based on the outcome of that consultation. But it starts from this algorithm that uses those reports to make these things. And then again, it's very simple to create this. The quality of the lab is really good, so the supplements are working very well for everybody. And then it's great because within 2 or 3 months you start to see symptoms
Yeah.
disappear. And it's not magic; it's just the biology and biochemistry of our bodies. But we're getting empowered because we're getting this information that again, we should have as kids, and live our lives this way, knowing what our our deficiencies and our mutations are, and treating ourselves accordingly. So it's really great. This is something we all need to know about
Yeah, and I
ourselves.
think, what's so interesting is I think about my aunt specifically. She has been battling all kinds of things just in her, I want to say like her late 40s, early 50s. She just started,
Hmm.
all these weird things were happening. She got implants, which I think probably triggered some of this. But then she was having, they put her on Victoza, which is a GLP-1, to help balance out blood sugar, which should have never happened. And then they removed her spleen
Hmm.
and then came back and said, oh, we actually didn't need to do that. So now she has to take medication for the rest of her life for that. And it's just been like this spiral. And she's healthy. I mean, she exercises, she plays pickleball, but she's just exhausted all the time. There are just things that don't make sense that continue to happen for her
Hmm.
lifestyle. And I think so many people can relate to this, where they just feel like they're doing all the things they can to control the situation and nothing is helping. And then it just becomes super frustrating, and that's when people kind of give up.
Yeah,
But this,
there's a lot of that going on.
yeah, go ahead.
Unfortunately, what you said, no, I said there's a lot of that going on. Unfortunately, I have so many people that have gone to that place where they've given up, but then somebody's shared with them, oh, I saw this guy, and he gave me some insight that I wasn't able to find. And then a lot of times when people are in that situation, they don't want to have hope, because they're you get to a certain point and you don't even want to have hope anymore, because you don't want it to be false and just to be disappointed, especially if you've gone so many routes and had so many things done that still didn't work. You start to wonder, and people have said this to me, am I ever going to be normal
Hmm.
again? And unfortunately, the route that so many people take in society doesn't bring them the answers, because this is just going back to basics. This is going back to like basic physiology and basic biochemistry of how our bodies function to begin with. It's amazing to me that medical people, they're smart people. You got to be pretty smart to get into medical school, and you learn all the same normal anatomy that I've learned as a chiropractic physician, but somehow through the education process, they start to think about pathology, and somehow they don't look at how do you get the body to fix it itself. They somehow think something from the outside is going to, fix it, but they're only looking at symptoms, just like you just talked about your aunt. They didn't look at the real true cause of what was going on, whether they ended up in taking out a spleen, you
Yeah.
said? I mean,
And then came back and said, "Oh, whoops, that wasn't what we were supposed to do. We didn't need to do that." This was
yeah,
City of
how many
Hope in
whoopses are
Southern
there all
California.
every year?
Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating for me to
Yeah,
watch too. But this seems like this is an answer and a direction. And I just think of things like so simple. If you're trying to put together something and it requires a certain screwdriver head, right? You can't just go get a flat screwdriver head when you need, what's the other one called? You need the right piece.
Phillips,
Yeah, the
Phillips.
Phillips.
You can't get a slotted if you need a
Yes, it's
Phillips.
kind of the
Yes.
same thing, right? You can't in
Yep.
outside of our own human body, things don't work if you don't have the correct pieces. So why would it work
Right.
any differently internally? Which just it just makes so
No.
much more sense. And this just seems like such an easy solution. And I think too, it's coming from someone who's gone. I left traditional medicine a long time ago, and I think there is a place for it, but um, we'll just leave that alone. So then I went to functional medicine, and I did all these tests, right? And I don't remember having this conversation about this kind of testing though. And I was on all kinds of supplements. Nothing was working. It just felt very frustrating and overwhelming. And I've had the same conversation with my aunt. She's like, I just don't feel like the supplements are working, and I spend all this money and I'm taking all these supplements. It feels overwhelming. And it does. But when you're not looking at exactly how to fix something, you're just kind of, and I don't think functional medicine wings it. They're not doing that. But I've never had this kind of blood test, and I've done a ton of testing. So it's
Right.
it is something I think that should be done for everybody. Like you said, when they come straight out of the womb, test the baby. We know exactly what they need, what they don't need, how they process things. It's just a simple fix.
It is a simple fix, and it's not even that they're disregarding the information. They're just not even thinking
Mm-hmm.
that way. Just the whole mentality of how we're supposedly going to fix something that's broken in us. Just that's all wrong. I just think that you can never go wrong. Listen, we've survived on this planet for thousands of years, and innately and inherently in us, we have everything we need to be able to do it and do it well. And now in this modern world, not only do we have the things in the modern world that are actually harming us. We're at war with, our bodies are at war with the world every day in our modern world today, and we need to fortify ourselves. But we also have knowledge and technology to be able to fight that battle very well. And, by having testing like this and from doing things that tap into the, nature's, healing of us, sunlight, the grounding of the earth, the oxygen of the air. These are all things that have sustained us for centuries. But it's only in this modern world that, we're now living on concrete slabs. We wear rubber soles, so we're losing the Earth's natural pulse and rejuvenation of our own polarity day to day. Plus all these wireless networks around us and 5G and Bluetooth and, electricity, the grid itself is causing all these high frequency electromagnetic fields that are harming our cells' ability to function, to bring in nutrients, to carry oxygen, to communicate, cell to cell. And so we have to become so aware of these things so at least we can mount a good battle against this modern world that's killing us every
Yeah.
day. So with that in mind, I think it's important that not only do we get to understand the biochemistry that and our unique needs in that, but also what can we do on a daily basis to stave off a lot of these things that are coming at us all day. Minimize our exposure to toxins. We've learned recently that everyone's got microplastics in them. So plastics are everywhere. So getting rid of plastic in your home, getting rid of going to glass, and not drinking out of water bottles anymore that are plastic, because I believe it's actually causing reduced testosterone in young males. I mean, since when do 20-something-year-olds have low
Yeah.
testosterone? It's something that we're doing. So we really have to become super educated about how to navigate this world in a healthy way. Starting with ourselves and understanding how we work. It's something they should be teaching us in school, as kids growing up, but unfortunately, it's not. and that's just the way it is. But there are ways, and there's information out there, so we just have to familiarize ourselves and be willing to, do the homework and be compliant with what we learn. It's no value to learn what your methylation issues are and your intracellular deficiencies if you're not going to take the
Right.
supplements. You have to do it all. So
Yeah.
anyway,
No, and I mean, to that point too, I listened to a podcast with Gary Brecken. I know you loved him. You love him. I do too. I didn't realize I've been following him for a long time in our previous conversations. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I know who he is. I've listened to a ton of his podcasts. But the one he mentioned today was just talking about the 4 things that he always recommends that you can do for free. So get the sunlight, ground, oxygen, and then cold shower. And so he was like
mm-hmm.
elaborating a little bit on each one, and he talked about sunlight, how we're supposed to be, we are conditioned to be outside, over 80% of the time in the sunlight. But now
Right,
we're in the homes or in an office over 90% of the time, which is not good,
right,
right? And people are concerned about cancer, but
right.
it's not the sun, it's the foods that we're consuming, the environment that we're in. That is the biggest player for the increase in the cancer. And then he was talking about
Yeah,
grounding, and you could probably, from a doctor's perspective, but he was talking about how he did, which I'm sure you've already seen, the blood test, where he tested his blood before he was grounding, and then he went outside, grounded for I think about 10 minutes, came back in, and he was showing the difference under the microscope, right? How the
yeah,
magnetism, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but
yeah. Sure. It's easy. We Gary and I both have something in our office called the Superhuman Protocol. Superhuman Protocol combines a pulsed electromagnetic field of grounding, exercise with oxygen therapy, and then red light therapy. So we're taking those 3 aspects of nature that he's talking about in that podcast, and we put it together in a 3-step process that condenses from a time standpoint, but puts them all in order. So what you just described is what he did, because I've done it myself. I took blood, I put it on a slide and put it up on a screen like a live cell, and I saw that all my blood cells were my red blood cells were kind of like little raisins, and they were all like bunched together like a bunch of grapes. And so if you think about red blood cells going through the bloodstream like that, all kind of clumped together and small, they can't be carrying oxygen very well,
yeah,
can they? So then you go on the pulse electromagnetic field or you ground and you recheck. And what you find is that all of a sudden, all those red blood cells are big, shiny looking discs, and they're all repelling each other because they're negatively charged on the outside of the membrane. So net negative charge. And when you try to put 2 ends of a magnet together, they repel each other, the 2 same ends, that is. And that's exactly what the Earth is doing to our cell structures. It's giving us a net negative charge. So now our red blood cells get big, they repel each other, and now they can carry oxygen optimally because the surface area of carrying that oxygen is so much greater than when they're all clumped up together. And that's the difference between grounding and not grounding, as well as just these high frequency electromagnetic fields around us are causing that clumping effect. They're ruining our cell's ability to carry oxygen, to bring nutrients into the cell membrane, and to throw out metabolic breakdowns, and so cells get inflamed, and so many people are suffering just from that,
just so
just
wild.
just from that. Yeah, I know, right?
So wild. But and he talked about how he explained it exactly how you just did, and how we exchange
Yeah,
our energy with the earth. I mean, just 10 minutes you're recharging your body, and it changes the pH in your blood, was what he was talking about, and makes it more alkaline, and disease cannot function in an alkaline state.
that's correct. Especially
Yeah.
cancer. I mean, it doesn't make it doesn't make energy. A cancer cell doesn't make energy the same way a healthy cell does, and the difference is oxygen. Oxygen is the key, because when oxygen is not present in a cell, then the cell is going through a different process of making energy. It's at a much lower level, and it's using glucose instead of oxygen to optimize that. A cell that's making energy without oxygen is only running at like 2 horsepower. It's not horsepower, but it's like 2 cycles of ATP production. But a cell that has oxygen is running at 36 horsepower, or 36 cycles of ATP production. That's 16 times more energy production per cell. You talk about somebody that's dragging because they're not making enough energy in their 30 to 50 trillion cells in their body. Just get that optimized. Again, the deep breathing, the grounding, and then the sunlight will get those 3 things in in your life every day and be able to get that energy production, because again, that cell is going to be healthy, it's going to age much slower, the degeneration process of that cell is going to be way reduced, and it's going to be it's going to be reduced, so they're not going to be dealing with a lot of the breakdown effects of just cell metabolism not being optimal. Those cells die; they become zombie cells much more easily. Zombie cells are cells that we should have gotten rid of a long time ago because they're really not functioning and they're just robbing our resources and still making energy, but they're using our resources that more healthy cells can be using. So all of those things are so important. And the simple thing, as Gary says, the grounding, the deep breathing, and the sun exposure. I have I've thought about this more recently. I have patients. We live, in Southeast Florida, so we're about 10 minutes from the beach here. But there's also places that are, much further from the beach. I find that my patients that live by the beach, compared to the ones that are not by the beach, they're in a very different
Mm-hmm.
headspace. Most everybody that lives down on the beach end, they're either walking on the beach daily, they're riding their bikes somewhere down in there, they're in the sun every day, they look healthier, and there's no golf courses down here. Now you get the people that live more west of the beach, that there's golf courses, so there's fertilizer, there's pesticides. They do so much to manicure the town to make it look pretty. But imagine the amount of toxicity. You can even smell the difference in the air quality when you go by the beach versus when you're, in this part of town. So I've seen firsthand the difference very consistently in the people that do live by the beach, because they are getting on walking. It's like a regular routine for them. And, they're getting that better oxygen quality, and they're getting sunlight. I mean, simple things that, like you pointed out earlier, we used to spend 90% of our time outside. Now it's, 10% and 90%
Yeah.
indoors.
Oh man, that's terrifying. Okay, so then
Oh, man.
the last one he mentioned was cold showers. I absolutely hate being cold. This is like the hardest thing for me to do. I've done sauna, then a cold plunge, then sauna, then cold plunge. I hate it. I mean, I think once I get into like a cold plunge situation, I can feel more. My mom and I did this at a place, I can't remember what it was called, but it was a sauna, cold plunge, and you do it for however many minutes. I think it's like an hour. You can kind of space it out how you want,
Back and forth.
and you
Yeah.
do feel like whoa, like maybe you drink a shot of espresso or something. It is crazy what that does, and I don't know if you can kind of speak to that too, because I think you have a cryo machine, right, which might do the same thing.
Yeah, so we started out with whole body cryotherapy about 8 or 9 years ago. But I've actually moved over towards the cold plunge for the following reason. First of all, um, I found for myself, my body got so acclimated to that whole body cryotherapy because it's liquid nitrogen cooled air. So it's the air that's surrounding you that's cold. But air doesn't have that same thermal convection that water does. So in other words, in water will steal that heat from your body much faster than cold air will. So you're not really dropping the body's temperature sort of much internally, because you do it on the surface. The skin will drop, but it doesn't get inside, which is really what's revving up that metabolic rate in terms of your cells trying to make more energy, to make more heat for your body to counteract it, because your brain doesn't know in 4 or 5 minutes, whatever it's going to be, you're back in 75 degrees of temperature. So we as mammals have this built into our physiology. All mammals have it, because again, before we started living in these controlled environments, we were subject to the elements. And if we happen to live in a temperate climate which had winters, our bodies have this built-in mechanism to respond to cold in a way that it stimulates through these proteins that are excreted by the liver to boost our metabolism, to boost our regenerative power of our tissues, to boost our growth hormone, to boost testosterone, to boost our immune systems. So our body's physiological response to cold is a very, regenerative type of thing, because again, the body's trying to survive. So all the things that will fortify our bodies to be strong and to be hardy against the environment is already built into our physiology. So how cool is that? That in this modern world, all we need to do is to simulate being outdoors in a cold winter by just jumping in a cold pool for 5 or 6 minutes, and getting that same stimulation that actually helps to revive and regenerate our bodies. Helps to heal things faster. Again, getting our metabolic rate means our cells are making more energy, so they're functioning at a higher level. the anti-inflammatory effects amazing, because when you're in that water, all your outer blood vessels constrict and shove all your blood into your core, so your vital organs and your nervous system is getting concentrated with the oxygen that's been throughout your bloodstream, but now it's being all concentrated in that core. Same time, any inflammation that you have at the musculoskeletal system, if you have in your joints or your fascia or your muscles themselves, all that fluid's being squeezed out of those areas and into the core. So that doesn't automatically come back and swell back up into your knee or your elbow. That's all being like reabsorbed into your body. So now all that swelling has been pushed away. And when you do this on a regular basis, you're going to keep musculoskeletal swelling to a very minimum. So just the way it helps, just from an aches and pains kind of standpoint too, it's just remarkable. It's a small price to pay to feel great every
Mm-hmm.
day, and I'm a big fan of it. I love the contrast too, because heat also has, especially with infrared sauna, it also has some really great benefit to do a similar thing from the shock of the heat and what it does to the body in terms of getting up that repairing of the body. It helps the water molecules too that are sort of vibrated by the infrared heat to remove toxic metals that might be built up into our tissues, to our fat cells. Because a lot of us walk around with exposure to metals that just in our environment, and a lot of people are sensitive to that too, and they could be suffering from that and not even realize that's what it's at. So these two things are really great things to include in your life as a regular proactive way to get your body to do its best healing, to give it that boost, to survive this, modern world that we're living
Yeah.
in.
And again, they're just simple steps that you don't have to pay for. I mean, I would love to come to your clinic if you want to open one out here in Boise. But it people can do this every day in their everyday life, and it doesn't cost
Yes.
anything. Yeah.
No. And again, I think what's the important thing for us, when we're talking and people are listening to this, is to know how they can implement these things, for themselves, and not have to, make a big investment to do it. The best thing to do is use nature around us. The creation that we live in has everything we need. We just have to be disciplined and make it a part of our lives. I like how Gary says, it's first thing in the morning. That's his routine. Now I do superhuman protocol first thing in the morning too. And, I used to do whole body cryotherapy first thing in the morning, but instead I'm doing the cold plunge. And I tell you, there's nothing like waking up and getting your body going by getting
Sure.
into 40 or 50-degree water for 5 or 6 minutes. I mean, you don't need caffeine. There's no energy drink that can ever compare to this, and it sets you right for the day, Janessa. I mean, it gives you that sense of well being, and you start off that way, and it just gets you so good. And I have to tell you, since I've been doing that too, I sleep so good. My sleep is deep. I've actually slept through the night more times than not for the first time in like 30 years, where I would sleep 7.5 hours straight without even getting up. And for the last 30 years, I mean, I would easily get up once or twice, and use the restroom or whatever it is. But since I've been really focused on this kind of lifestyle, I sleep better than I have, than I said, like in 30 years. And sleeping good is so great, because the next day, you're energized, you're full of energy, mentally, you're much more, sharp. And, I have a lot of energy that I put out all day long. I'm on my feet about 12 hours. I'm interacting with patients. I'm manually working on them. And there's no way I would be able to keep up this pace in my mid 60s as I am now if I wasn't doing all these things to get my body to what I call youthing instead of
Yeah.
aging. I don't even like the term anti-aging, because there's still a negative
Hmm.
connotation there. I'm not trying to throw off aging. I'm not trying to be anti-aging. I want my body to continue to regenerate and grow younger as I go, instead of the other way around. I want to invest in the incline of my health versus just to manage the decline of my
Yeah.
health. That's what my motto is here, and that's what I try to share with people, because anybody can do this. This isn't just for a handful. Anybody can do this.
Yeah, I saw one of my girlfriends posted something about one of her clients mentioned that she's on an anti-assisted living course or something like that. Which anti, again, there's a negative connotation, but I right, nobody wants to
Yeah.
go into assisted living. If you can live your best life until you're 95 and feel good and healthy, and why would you not? Why would you not?
Right. It's an investment. It's not going to happen by design, and you have to know what you're up against, and you know how your body works. And we're not taught these things, but there's enough information now and ways to learn these things about us now, and it has to be a
Yeah.
focus. And as a father, I have four children, and they're all a bit older now, but they're all very much into understanding how to live and be healthy. They all exercise, and I never shoved it down their throat because I've been working out since I'm 10 and eating reasonably well since that age as well. So it was easy for me to kind of lead by example because they're like, okay, dad works out. That's one of the things he does. This is how dad eats. And, all of them in their own way have adopted that for their lifestyle to make it work for them. And so just by leading by example, and I think it's important for parents to really be that for their kids because this current generation of kids have the lowest life expectancy that we've had in decades in this country.
Yeah.
And that's what, go ahead.
No, I just had a conversation with my husband the other day, who's a vice principal, and just speaking on this, he said, we have so many kids with these IEPs and these 504s. They're just like special requests for these students that have anxiety. And anxiety is
Mm-hmm.
the word that they use. He's like, I'm trying to, in these meetings with the parents, explain that anxiety's fine. Like you're meant to have anxiety. It's a good thing. It means you're nervous about something, but having it all the time is not a good thing. However, it's this overly used word. We also have talked about this before, having kids constantly on social media and computers and TVs, and they're not outside being active. And then you look at the component where you were showing the genetic makeup, and I'm sure there's tons of kids, especially with all the vaccines and all the medication that the younger generation has been given or been forced to have, that have, you know, probably had some negative effects on their bodies, especially depending on how they are able to break things down or not break things down. So it's like these compounding things. And it's so sad to watch these kids that are so young that have never had real life issues. Like, you're anxious about what, going to school? That's not a real life issue. Wait till you have to pay bills and take care of a home or take care of a sick family member, or put gas in your car and you have no money. Those are real world things. So
Sure.
it's
I,
concerning.
I want to speak to exactly what you said and what your husband and you had spoken about. So this is going to be a part three. What we're talking about here, we used to call it, adrenal burnout, but it's overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system. And unfortunately, the digital world that the kids are living in is causing that constant stimulation of the fight or flight response, which is supposed to be a short-lived thing. I mean, if you and I were sitting in the same room and all of a sudden a lion walked in, that would be a reason for a sympathetic response. We're going to kill this thing or we're going to run like hell, right? So that's supposed to be a short lived thing. However, that is starting to happen because of the stimulation of the digital world on their brains and their nervous system is keeping this in this sympathetic drive, overdrive, especially kids that are playing video games with, racing or fighting, wars and, killing people and all this kind of stuff. This is keeping that sympathetic nervous system in overdrive, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for all the repair, is responsible for sleep. All the things that rebuild us and regenerate us and reset us is what the parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to do. And they're not giving that a chance because they're getting into this hyper sympathetic state, which is what they're calling anxiety. And as you pointed out, it doesn't have any grounding in an actual situation. It's just because the nervous system is overactive and it's not even taking into consideration what's actually going on here. They don't have real issues. School stressful. Yeah, study for tests. Yeah, I mean, we all grew up doing that, but not to the level of seeing it today. And that's the difference. There's never been a generation that grew up on cell phones and devices, except for this generation coming up. The kids that were born, 20 years ago and 15 years ago and 10 years ago, they've never been without these devices. And that's what's hurting them too. So getting into understanding on a daily basis how to use parasympathetic stimulation and things that they can do can help them just get their bodies again back to the functioning, just like the other things that we talked about today. This is another thing, and it's epidemic now, as you just pointed out. But this is also an actionable thing if we can bring some resources for people to understand what needs to be done. So we could talk about that at length at another
Yeah,
time if you'd
that'll
like.
for sure be part three. Because I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that with their kids or kids that they work with. And again, it's concerning that this is going to be the generation that is taking over. Yeah, just so many things.
Very
What do we
much
do?
so. I just had a conversation earlier with a patient. Yeah. So look, 70 years ago, there were guys between 18 and 24 years old, even younger than that lied about their age because they wanted to go off and fight, fight the Japanese or fight the Germans, and knew that they might not even come back. That's 18 to 24-year-old kids, right? 18 to 24-year-old kids today, 2 generations later, need a safe space because somebody called them a
Yeah.
name. I mean, how does that
Yeah.
happen? And we've allowed it to happen. Just like why do we give trophies to the losing
Mm-hmm.
team? Something's been infecting our society for a long time that's turned it all upside down. And I think everything we're talking about, even the nutritional part, because food isn't what it used to be either, is hurting us, and it's going down this horrible path that, like you just talked about. This is the generation that's going to be in charge next.
Pretty scary. I mean, hopefully we can help that with some of these conversations and how to navigate that, how to change
That
it.
is my prayer as
Yeah.
well. That's exactly my prayer. That's why I want to do this, because it's actionable. We can fix it. We just have to be willing to invest in ourselves and lead our kids through
Yeah.
that too. And it's going to go against the grain, but so what? It's a small price to pay to feel good, as we should. Everybody should walk around feeling superhuman.
Yeah, and I think too, once it gets traction and people start to see the difference and understand why this makes more sense than what they're currently doing. And I think too, the feedback from people is like, well, it costs money up front and I don't want to have to pay that up front, or I don't want to have to pay for all these supplements. Well, you're going to pay in the beginning or you're going to pay in the end. So there's two ways you're going to
Yep.
do it. You're not going to get out of this life for free. Oh,
Right. And you're going to invest in your health, or you're going to be reactive to it. Health's an investment. It's not a co-payment. At the doctor's office. That's not what
yeah,
health is.
exactly. Well, I loved our conversation today. I'll put all of this information in the notes. I will put again where they can find you, physicalevidenceconnect.com. That's how you can reach out to Dr. David Lipman. That's how you can schedule the labs and go over all of that with him. I always appreciate your time. And then we will do a part 3.
Okay.
That sounds fun.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Look forward to it,
Thank
Janessa.
you.
Find your wild.
As always, thank you so much for your time, because at the end of the day, that's the most important currency we have. I hope you took something away from today's episode. Don't forget to follow me at Find Your Wild with a Y on all your socials, as well as following the podcast on any of the platforms that you listen to. And most importantly, I hope you're one step closer to finding your wild.